So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to your weekly dose of fun, the new normal webinar, number 48 in the series. 2 more to go till we hit the 50, and very close to the 1-year anniversary, as of course everything is 1-year anniversary this week of lockdowns, and that was the inspiration for us starting this, as Shahid will no doubt talk about. Yeah, this week we're looking at customer centricity. We've got Claire Bailey joining us again. We had a great discussion the last time, and we're no doubt going to have another great one today. And so, as always, please contribute by entering your questions or opinions in the chat box, and we'll ask them. We'll monitor it. We'll respond. We'll do whatever and include it in the conversation. But yeah, thanks for being here again. If you've joined us regularly, and if it's your first time, welcome and hope you enjoy it. And with that, I shall hand over to my co-pilot, Shahid, to walk through the agenda for today.
I'm smiling and laughing, everyone, because regular viewers will know that usually he calls me his co-conspirator. So co-pilot is definitely the promotion. So thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon to all of our audience, our repeat audience, and our new members who are joining for the first time this week. This is the New Normal webinar. The New Normal webinar was started by Steve and I, and has been facilitated by our wider team for the best part of a year now. We're almost at our 50th episode. We started it in response to the beginning of COVID and lockdown, and Steve and I definitely thought that this was a moment where we had to up our game. We had to look for new ways of reaching out and communicating with people who are going to be remotely located, people who are going to be shocked and kind of, awestruck by the events that were going on at that moment. And there'd be all sorts of need for knowledge and for learnings and for problem solving, etc., etc. And I hope, Steve and I sincerely hope, with the rest of our team, we hope that we've tried to fill in some of those gaps for you, tried to share some of that knowledge, which hopefully has gotten you over some of the more difficult questions which are facing us in our working lives, and sometimes in our social and personal lives as well, with some of the subjects that we've covered in the past 48 weeks. In that vein, in that effort, what we've tried to do is build up a library, a repository, which you all have access to. There will be an email after the back of this webinar where you'll be invited to check not only the video recording of this week's episode, but you will also see the archive for the previous 47 weeks, including the resource pages which we generate as well. So that's an ongoing knowledge base which we want to share with you, which we want you to benefit from. Today's topic, as Steve has alluded to, is hosted, or our guest expert is Claire Bailey. Hi, Claire. Lovely having you again. So it's all about Claire and her retail champion persona walking us through customer centricity. We're talking today about, what is customer centricity? What are the component parts that you might expect from a attitude or a process which is focused around the customer? And what we'll try and do is break that down for you and share with you some of the successful milestones, if you like, in the journey which organizations are thinking about and adopting. We will have Q&A throughout the webinar. So again, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat icon. Click on that, and then you can enter your comments, your queries, your questions and challenges. If you don't like what you're hearing, by all means challenge it. We'll be happy to share with the panel as we go through this. Steve and I will be monitoring the chat box as well. At the end of the webinar, we will go through the resource page. So the resource page is our ongoing commitment as a team to share with you not only the video webinar and the broadcast we do every week, but we share with you a documented set of resources which dive deeper into the subject for that week. So that resource page will be a summary of use cases, white papers, and video links, which will further articulate the subject of the week. And with that, we'll also try and give you an indication of next week's webinar subject. and what we'll be discussing to hopefully entreat you and entice you to join us again next week. And certainly we're keen that if you enjoy the subjects, if you enjoy the webinar format, please do share it amongst your network, pass it on when you get the invite, or if you're considering joining, by all means share it amongst your network. The more the merrier in terms of audience. We're happy to see everyone. Okay, with that, if I may, I'll pass you over to the main pilot. I'm the navigator to his piloting, Steve Ingram. Thank you.
I'm going to see how far we can stretch analogies as we go through this the whole time.
Give it a go before we fall over.
Give it a go. You managed to get shock and awe into an agenda, which is quite impressive. Okay, falls to me now to do the usual, the context setting. So what are we talking about today? Well, you've seen the invite. We've talked about the voice of process, and we'll explain, and Claire will explain what that's about. But it's all around the wonderful target of customer centricity that everybody puts in all of their annual reports, they put in all of their statements, they put in their press conferences, they talk whatever about being totally customer centric. And we've all seen charts drawn on, like the one on the left, where we're talking the customer at the center of everything, and we'll have our strategy will support around it. All products are based. You know, we've got all about customer relationship management systems. That makes us customer centric. We have lots of people manning our Twitter account. That makes us customer centric. But does it? We have a function called customer experience. Does that make us customer centric? Well, actually, yeah, we're going to challenge the view and say that it's actually it's more about a way of thinking, and more about a culture, and more about a thing that sits within the organization. And that's more the diagram on the right. We're not going to walk you through a diagram. We're not going to give a methodology, but there's a whole lot of discussion around what we think and what we believe. And, you know, by all means, feel free to challenge, feel free to disagree and ask questions, etc. So that's where we're really focusing on. Is we all talk customer centricity, but what is it and how do we get there? This is our view, and we're going to do it in the same way as we always do. We talk these discussions. We have our cue card just in case we forget what we're talking about, but there's not really likely to be a chance of drying up when you've got me, Shahid, and Claire in the room. We're going to look, there are 5 main elements of it though. We're going to look at the 3 pillars as we see it of customer centricity. We're going to look at what the voice of the process is and talk through that and discuss that. Look at various KPIs in process management, the old, if you can measure it, you can manage it. KPIs to drive behaviors, because it's all about behavior. And then what this means to the management of the businesses. I'm sure we'll cover all of that in some structure and in some sequence, but it's really great to have Claire back on today. Welcome, Claire. And
thank you.
Take a few seconds to introduce yourself in case nobody's met you before. And then
okay, well, my name's Claire Bailey, and I am the wearer of many hats. I consider myself to be a retail expert because that's what other people have called me. But reality is I'm actually a bit of a supply chain and data geek. And that's how I came across Steve about 20 years ago now, and aging us quite a lot there. Yeah. And a few years ago, I was involved in a conference where I first came across this concept that we're going to look at today around these pillars of customer centricity. And I can't take credit for it all myself. I was chatting away with a gentleman, you can find him on LinkedIn, called Ian Golding. And he came up with it. At the time, I was doing a lot of work with process management software. And I quickly realized that customer experience and customer centricity and process management all fit together really, really well. So without sort of stealing the march on what we're about to go through today, that's the hat I'm wearing today is my passion for process and how that can actually drive the customer experience.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, God, you're going back a way when we're talking about supply chain and data. I think my hair was nearly dark.
Nothing's since been white since birth.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think so. So, okay, so off we go. So we often talk about customer centricity and how do we understand how well we're doing with our customers. And, you know, we've all worked in retailers. And we all look at the voice of the customer. We've all seen how can customers give us feedback, and that will tell us exactly how well we're doing in the view of the customer. I remember just one anecdote from me is we used to do one at a place I was at where it used to be please give us feedback, here's a website on the receipt. And the only people that ever responded to that were the people that were really, really peed off with you. And they could take the time and the effort to find the website, log on, and then tell you just how bad you were. So then you feed that into a board meeting where you look at, so what's our feedback looking like this week? Oh, 98% of our customers are deeply unsatisfied. and it just doesn't work. And then you start to build your customer centricity from that. So, yeah. So the 3 pillars, Claire. Sorry, that's my launch in. 3
Okay,
pillars.
so where this came from was, like you rightly say, we've always tried in these rather uncustomer friendly ways to capture what customers think, whether they're internal or external, and the stakeholders and so on. But infrequently have I seen businesses of any industry sector really understanding what the process tells us. And where this comes in, I'm going to get the shameless plug in really early on now. When I was putting my thoughts down on paper to write my first book, ding, there we go, I'll do it again. I was looking at what positioning was all about, what brand identity and loyalty was all about. And I came up with the essence of it's about keeping your processes regularly and reliably, keeping your, promises to your customers through delivering to a standard, a consistent standard. And that's achieved through quality systems and processes. But there was something more to it about that, about personality and everything else. But it reminded me of a journey that my parents' business went on in the mid-80s in order to be able to sell their business. And they were a manufacturer to retail business predating the internet. And that was all about establishing total quality management and best practice systems that eradicated faults and failures. Why? Because that led to negative customer feedback. So there is a relationship. And obviously, when you start to think about it, how had you got those people going on those websites making that 98% negative feedback? Because something had been done wrong.
Yeah.
So what's going to stop you doing those things wrong as the regular and repeated process, rather than eradicating those faults and failures, driving away those failures that aggravate customers, frustrate them, disappoint them, and make them ultimately turn away from your brand to an alternative brand? But then also, in so doing, there's that sort of natural byproduct of quality, efficiency, elimination of waste. And if you actually apply the principle of process management so that everything your business does is about continuously delivering the customer promise, and then also adapting and bending to the needs and wants of the current and future customer, and by continuously reevaluating the process and therefore the voice of the process by what we'll come on to in a bit, the measurement and the KPIs and how that relates to behavior, then we do actually reach a customer-centric organization. We get to be more profitable, more scalable, and more efficient, and we can pass on the savings to customers, which in turn delights them, or by reinvesting in an even better experience next time. So that's where, to me, the whole thing became quite well embroiled, and it suddenly became abstracted from let's just measure and manage and performance manage and report on KPIs, but let's actually make this intrinsic to all the decisions that we make going forward about how we treat each other and our suppliers and our customers and the wider community within which we trade.
I remember there's a guy that we had on, I actually joined one of these webinars that I worked with very closely. He was our marketing director, was Andy Portsmouth. And Andy did a session on leadership on here. But it was a similar thing. Andy used to always say in a board meeting, to our town halls, to anything like that, is if you are doing anything that does not ultimately impact the customer, you shouldn't be here and you shouldn't be anywhere in this business. And you should know exactly what your role in the business does to contribute to our customer. And Andy was passionate about that.
But you see, the problem is a lot of big companies, they don't get that across to the employees or the people involved in the processes. So you could be in a fairly desk-based job, perhaps in finance, let's say accounts payable. You don't necessarily consider that by not paying that invoice today and letting it go to its full net days, from a financial point of view, oh, I've kept the cash flow longer, aren't I clever? But actually, if I pay those suppliers in advance, they think, oh, that's really good of you. And then they might say, well, we'd like to offer you a rebate for speedy payment. Or worse, if we pay them late, does that mean that then they cease to supply, on-shelf availability drives up, and we get disappointed, complaining customers, lost sales, and they go to the competition. So when you start to break down where each part of the big organizational infrastructure, each person has an important part to play and that they understand what that is, then they can start to adapt and change their behavior because they recognize that they are valued and they're not just one tiny cog in a great big machine, but they have a purpose there.
That's a great point. Unintended consequences of behavior. I'll give an example to our audience. A very large retailer used to have quite an aggressive procurement policy with its suppliers. So they'd negotiate at the beginning of the year, and they'd keep coming back 2-3 times a year, looking for more promotional support, looking for rebates, and looking to prop their margin continuously through the year. Now, push comes to shove, a few years down the road, it was analysed what was going on at the organisation, and they compared it against their leading competitors. And what was happening was the suppliers actually built in that behaviour into their negotiation plan with the retailer. Now, I'll explain what that means. Is the supplier knew that they would end up paying more and more margin back. So they'd give them a higher price at the beginning of the year and then build in additional rebates into the structure over the time period. Now, that's crazy because the other competitors, the other retailers were getting, according to the suppliers, they were getting their best price the first time and enjoying it throughout the year.
Well, that's a phrase you've always said that I really like as well, which is right first time.
Yeah.
So that's what we aspire to. And obviously errors and mistakes happen. But a very similar anecdote to yours and to others that I've seen, where little things that people do because they think that they're cutting corners or saving a bit of time actually has this ripple effect of consequences. And in things like the supply chain in particular, lots of small errors added up together can make a massive amount of an issue. So one of my bugbears is, let's say I was to go into a supermarket and buy a selection of individual yogurts, all of different flavors. I then have to have a 20-minute discussion with that till operative about why they shouldn't have scanned them all as toffee, and say, don't you realize you'll now get 12 replenished as toffee, you'll go out of stock of the ones I have bought, you'll get over the stocks of these, it'll send the system haywire, just do it properly. And they go, I never really thought of it like that. And I have actually had this lecture, I'm sure you can imagine. But
it does surprise me so much. Yeah.
Little things all add up. So if you think in a retailer with, say, 500 outlets and a couple of hundred customers a day, that's quite modest. And each of them scan a product incorrectly. And then you roll that up to your depot level and then to your supplier forecast level and then into the budgets that you're negotiating with your suppliers on. You could potentially be 20% overbought and wonder why you're running at such high obsolescence and wastage costs, just because the person that scanned the product didn't understand their part to play. And out of stocks are very annoying and do lose customers and do impact customer-centric thinking, but similarly wastages too, because from an ethical and environmental standpoint, more and more these days, our customers do not want to see us creating that level of obsolescence in supply chains. We've seen fashion retailers being dragged through fairly negative PR campaigns about destroying items rather than getting to the lower cost market. And we don't like to see our food rate retailers having food put in the bin just because it's past its sell-by date.
So as a devil's advocate type question, Claire, one of the things that we'd love to share with our audience as well, and a question from me, customer centricity, is it just a head office function, or should it be every single role throughout an organization? And as you say, an active understanding of customer centricity and what your role means.
Well, I think there's two different phrases there. Customer experience or customer insight can be functions because they undertake to do a job for the benefit of the customer. However, customer centricity is a belief, it's a set of values, it's cultural. So it has to come from the top down. And that has to be championed throughout every level and go up and down. So whether you're giving somebody an induction for 4 hours on a Saturday in your local corner shop, whilst your brand name is on that fascia, you need them to be as committed to doing the best they can do as the CEO and the board. And I think, moreover, it's about a transparency, which is the polar opposite of the adversarial procurement buyer-supply relationship we describe. And it's an empowerment. So yes, we want them to follow the process that we've worked on for many years to standards we know are faultless. But when new faults are observed or new ideas around efficiencies could be implemented, we need to not take it as an insult that this Saturday person who's been there for 5 minutes and works 2 hours a month is starting to tell us we could do better. Because who's to say that they haven't just come up with the most amazing light bulb moment that transforms a business and gives us leapfrog on the competition?
Yeah, no, I mean, we used to get, again, in my most recent incarnation working in retail, we got our best ideas came from the shop floor and came there. And it was good because actually it showed so much about how our board and our CEO had set a culture that people could actually do that and could actually feed back, because we got ideas that said, what you're suggesting and doing here is absolutely bonkers and will never work, regardless what it might have said on a spreadsheet back at support office or whatever. And the other thing is, that would be good, but if we could also do this, then that would really help. And yeah, it's getting those ideas back and people feeling that way. But we're actually seeing the chain gets extended even more these days now, because with us getting more and more stuff delivered to home, and it's not just at lower price points. So people are buying luxury or very high price ticket items now and getting them home delivered. That delivery guy now becomes part of that whole chain and all of the need to deliver that same level of thinking of the customer and thinking of the brand almost as well.
Well, you remember, I don't know if you ever got to work with Mike Clare at Dreams, Steve. I got to know him quite well over about 10, 15 years ago. And one of the things he said that he did, which made a difference, and it does make it rather transactional, but it also has got a nice softness to it. The first thing was, he said, you might as well pay 15% more than the competition, because you might pay 15% more, but you get 50% more loyalty and commitment, and people are more driven because they feel valued, and money is the ultimate recognition of your value. But also, on the delivery driver's point, they had in-house delivery. They didn't outsource. Yeah. And when the delivery driver got to your house, instead of putting those, single-use blue plastic wrappers over their delivery shoes, they put on a Dreams, like a slipper, but it was still a steel toe cap slipper, but it was Dreams branded, because they were delivering a bed to a bedroom, so they wore their slippers. And those little touches made people go, that's really nice. Wow. Because they've considered right through to the customer getting the item set up in their bedroom in a way that also has respect for their property. And obviously, then people are going to talk about it. I'm still impressed by that today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's it is a really great example. Our local furniture shop does something very similar. And with a view of, I'm coming into your house, I'm doing this, and I'll deliver. It's brilliant. It's a really good idea.
If I might also say, on this theme about insights and customer feedback and employee feedback helping to improve the outcome for customers, we're dealing with now a lot of trade, a lot of commerce now online. So as well as the physical format stores, you're dealing with websites as well. And one of the things that we're seeing is, as well as the employees generating feedback, you've also got now automated systems, AI, which is actively sitting there looking at patterns, looking at behavior from your customers. And one of the things Steve and I, see from our experiences and our employment is, you've actively got, for instance, real-time insight generation. So it's a phrase, but essentially what its meaning is, it's monitoring behavior, it's monitoring patterns in customers' visits, in their searches, etc., in order to identify what is a more refined proposition for that customer. So that, talking about customer centricity is about custom-made offers.
Personalization. But you see, that is heading more towards a passive voice of customer element in the pillars, because through their search activity, they are giving away insights and information about themselves. And then if they go to the next level about telling you even more, then they give away even more information so you can tailor their experience. The way that that is achieved is obviously through the process. So it's totally interrelated. But in terms of, that's something you said earlier about the actual process. Yes, some of the best insight comes from the shop floor because they're more remote from some of the processes, but they're at the coal face of seeing the end result of them. And
Yeah.
it's that fresh pair of eyes, I think, is often really important.
Mm.
And it takes me back to the early 90s when I was doing an engineering degree, and we had the honor of Sir John Harvey Jones coming to talk to us. And it was when he was known as the troubleshooter, and I think he did some work with MG. And it showed that in the manufacture of these cars, they went up and down, but wheeled up and down in and out of the workshop, something like a couple of hundred times in a process of manufacturing the vehicle. And not by doing that, by streamlining the processes, obviously taking into account dependencies, but by actually just eliminating the 5 minutes wheeled out in, 5 minutes back, and so on, they actually were able to eliminate enormous cost in the manufacture of those vehicles, which then, of course, meant that they went from a quite struggling business to being much more successful at the time. And I think it's things like that when somebody just comes and sits and watches what goes on, whether it be in our distribution centers and all these other things. So AI is kind of like a watching environment, but sometimes just sitting there and looking at what people do and thinking to yourself, why are they doing that? And why is probably the most valuable question we could ever ask. And I think we get very stale as people in our industries if we stop asking why. Because with the pace of change of technology, we can better things all the time. But it's that integration of the human has to still drive some part of the process. So we can only go so far by productionizing it. And in many respects, the faults or the failings can actually be the quirks of the experience that make it an experience that a customer values. So somebody might turn around and say, actually, it's the fact that when I go to a fine dining restaurant, the food's never always the same. It is in McDonald's though, but it's never the same every time because ingredient qualities and standards are different. But I like that because it's creative. So I also think that through part of this, there might be, and we're seeing it already, a bit of the rise of an artisan because they understand what the customer wants isn't always perfection, but it's a set of quality standards and a way of being treated that means that the experience is perfect for them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the process was.
Well, retailers are actually picking on your point, Claire, I think, in practical ways. So, and this was before the lockdown, if I remember correctly. For instance, John Lewis in some of their stores were introducing personal shoppers. Now, that we're not talking about personal shoppers for the stars and the celebs, for you and I, everyday ordinary folk. And those personal shoppers, the reason why they introduced it was they found that personal attention led to a checkout or a basket size which is somewhere between 40 and 60% higher than an independent shop. Now that's a massive result, right, for the retailer and for the customer, because the customers are going to feel great, personal attention. But
so the customer spoke with their spend, and the process delivered the result.
Yeah, that's right. And using John Lewis again, I mean, it's another good example I want to use. Prior to lockdown, John Lewis were recording about 64% of their annual turnover was online. God knows what it's like now, right? So you're absolutely right. The colleague model at John Lewis, for instance, creates a great stakeholding because those people are creating that. It's their personal wealth, right? They're not just employees, they're part of that ecosystem. So they give a lot of feedback into the loop around their offering, their displays, their promotions, etc.
I think that's great, but it's the one that everybody quotes, which means it must be an exception in many ways. Which means because John Lewis is upheld so often about this is the great, they've got the employee ownership, they have that. I'm just putting my devil's advocate hat on here as well. But
given the press release that they just put out today, it's probably not the best example.
But it's like, therefore it must be an exception because everybody quotes it. Why is everybody not, their employees all feeling the same? And it is that voice of the employee, which is just that almost the last pillar that we've touched on slightly. But too often the voice of the employee is seen in the annual feedback and the annual thing that everybody throws around to go, give us your satisfaction scores, and you get your department satisfaction and you get your own. And because it includes salary against all these other things, it's never satisfactory. And we're never really getting feedback from employees most of the time. We're just given an opportunity to have a moan. And because people need that at times. So it's how do we get that? This should be in the store huddles in the mornings. It should be in that. It should be just, it's like you said earlier, Claire, it's that culture and being able to, that we welcome the feedback. And I think the very first comment was robust feedback. And I think that's core to everything.
With what has happened in the last year, though, for the John Lewis model, is there has been an expectation over the years that there will be bonuses and there will be extra to your reward system than just your salary. And that's not been the case. So that may create more detraction from the brand, because much as you can tell people if they've got any kind of incentive or commission structures or whatever it may be, that to consider the bonus that it is, the clue is in the name, but they come to expect it. And then when it stops, that's quite negative. So when things are good, it was a great model, but now things are more challenged and there's going to be much more changes to roles and responsibilities, movement, perhaps more interaction with people through digital channels and social channels than perhaps in face-to-face. What is that going to do to their perceived employee satisfaction and their staff retention?
I want to clarify my pointing out John Lewis around customer satisfaction and feedback. That wasn't necessarily to promote the colleague model. My interest is, for instance, one of the questions I'd like to ask is, Claire, what would be a good model, bearing in mind voice of the customer, employee, and process? What would be a good model which you've seen, which you might think would be something which management teams might be interested in?
Well, I think that really depends, back to the point about what is customer centricity. That's about the culture and the values of the belief. And again, one of the things I explored when putting pen to paper, as it were, was that a way that you attract people to your brand, whether those people be suppliers, employees, or customers, is through the personality and the individuality that you express. So some people would feel compelled to work for, I don't know, let's say the Body Shop once upon a time because they believed in what Anita Roddick believed in, and they were drawn to that brand for things that are more than perhaps just the perceived value that they get or even the money they get paid. And quite on the other side, we saw again way back a while ago, a few years ago now, the brands who were accused of using child labor in their factories, and that people said, well, I don't want to work with them, or I don't want to shop with them because of different values. So I don't think there is a single model, but it's just about recognizing the individuality and personality that is expressed through the way that you do things and the promises you make to all those people that you come into contact with, your wider customer group, I suppose, and then consistently living up to those, because you will attract and repel those who are most like you as a brand.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. It is about that belief. It's fundamental. It is the old treat people like you would want to be treated yourself. It's the old, the customer, they may be at the center. The customer isn't always right. Even though some people do try and throw that one, the customer isn't always right, but it's right to have a conversation and work out what the gripe is necessarily. And then it's, you mentioned about the continuous improvement and the taking delay time out of things. I did that when I redid my warehouse and manufacturing facility. So we did the whole lean thing. Steve and lean in one sentence doesn't often come together, but we did the whole lean process, and we learned it from a company in Italy when we did it, and it was brilliant and it was really good. It was where you understood how things go, and this was in a real micro level, and this was from, we had our DC, our warehouse, and we had our manufacturing facility where we'd assemble our glasses and we cut them and we do all that sort of thing. But the amount of movement that these things made, how many times it was touched, how long it sat somewhere before the next action took place,
Mm.
was all really, really interesting. Even more interesting was where we got taken as a reference visit before we went and followed this process. Was we went to Lamborghini as a reference visit to actually go and see how they'd implemented lean through their factory, and that was just incredible. Yeah.
I
So that
just
was
had a
just
really
an
sensible
exciting
thought
Lamborghini
go through my
story.
head.
Yeah.
There was a point I was going to make this then, and it's popped in and straight out my head, but hopefully I'll remember it before the end of the session. But what is important, I think, these days is that people do feel that they, or rather people don't feel that they have to have every customer as a customer. So just because people spend money with your business doesn't mean that you need to be customer centric towards them. It might be that they're never going to be happy. You're just sort of a necessary evil because you might be their nearest outlet for a particular service or a solution. So the other thing is that you don't have to make all the people happy. So you're saying about the customer not, there it is. You're saying about the customer not always being right. But then also you would be wrong to try to fulfill their needs because you can't be all things to all people.
Yes.
And using things like range management, for example, which drives out your supply chain efficiencies, avoids proliferation, moves greater volumes of products, or as we all know, all those wonderful things. But that process depends upon initially understanding, well, who is the ideal customer? And if I was to lose 20 or 40% of some of my customers who are probably not that loyal and not that profitable anyway, would it make sufficient of a difference to my business versus the positive outcome of being more streamlined and more attuned to what the ideal customer wants? Because what I lose by getting rid of those who aren't particularly loyal anyway, I might get back in increased trade by rationalizing my range to be even more well curated, more on point to my higher spending loyal customers who really do identify with who my business is. And I think it's important sometimes to perhaps be brave and use that data to really cut some of the noise out of the business, to use what the process insights tell us to then enhance the experience and have that constant learning process as well.
It's interesting.
Go on, Shade, I'll let you go.
I was just going to say, it's interesting you use that number range 20 to 40%, because this week past, I actually went through some research with colleagues around what the market understands to be the churn in food and grocery retail. And it's approximately 40%. It's incredible, but because of the amount of competition out there, because of the co-location of stores and various other factors, and let's face it, because now the online accessibility of stores is far more available, the amount of customer churn is incredible. And a lot of it's based on price. Some of it's on quality, but a lot of it is based on price.
Two examples of range, just from, and getting it right, from a well-known, former known as a bakery, but now as a food to go place based in the Northeast, where what's one of the products that you can't get from there anymore? Loaves of bread. Rationalized range. People aren't going there for loaves of bread. It's not their range anymore. Secondly, but there are things that they do and that they do regionally as well. So there are certain things that if they didn't have Stotty cakes in Newcastle, then people would go next door because there is more competition. Like you're saying, Shai, there's more bakers around that you can get other things from, but then they wouldn't buy their food to go and they wouldn't buy those offerings. So there are certain things, like exactly to nail Claire's point about getting the range right and working out which customers are going to come in and which ones are actually, we don't want Mrs. Miggins that necessarily wants to just buy a loaf of bread, because we want somebody that comes in and buys their pasties, their breakfast baguettes, gets a coffee with it, and then gets a bag of crisps or whatever, rather than, and all of that. So it's a real example, and there is a huge loyalty there within that brand as well.
Well, it's interesting. We were talking about a particular person earlier today, weren't we, Steve, who will remain nameless, but it reminds me of an off-license chain I worked with, who are sadly no longer with us. And one of the things we looked at was range rationalization with the buying team, because they had got extremely proliferated. And the basic rule of thumb was, well, let's just call the bottom 20% of products by net margin contribution. But it wasn't until we started saying, well, hang on a minute. If that one bottle of red wine is in a basket with this one and this one and this and that, and the people that buy that one brand, they're not many in number, but they like to come 2 or 3 times a week, and they spend more on the higher price point products that deliver greater net contribution, that product needs to stay on the range. Now, that's where the data was telling us information, but I'm thinking, how long ago would that work have been? It's over 13 years. It predates AI and big data, I'd suggest, but it's something that I think a lot of processors are a little bit too ruthless at time as well. It's getting into the nuances. Yes. And I've been doing a piece of work with an independent retailer, helping them to specify an integrated e-commerce and e-POS solution. She is a complete technophobe. She doesn't even know that we've done this, because she just says, oh, so it's the same thing whether I upload it here or there. Oh, it's just one view of stock. I'm like, yeah, and one view of customer, and one view of product, and one view of profit and profitability by customer and channel and frequency. These are things that even now, even in this day and age, some of the bigger companies that I come across, they haven't got a clue about. Or if they do, the person that needed to know that to make a decision didn't know it. It was just lost in a report somewhere.
And the reason why I'm smiling is while you were describing that, I was thinking about there's a use case, an example of olive oil. There's a supermarket which sells extremely expensive olive oil. It's like £90 a bottle, but they only sell it like once, one might get sold a month or something like that. But they've got a range of £30 olive oil and £10 olive oil underneath it. And that £90 olive oil, if you remove it, it removes the incentive to purchase the £30 olive oil.
Well, now you're on chapter 5, and that would be price and assortment, elasticity, and the price ladder. I'll pay you later.
Yeah, it's all in your book, which is available at good bookshops.
Apparently, well, when they were allowed to be open. Now, unfortunately, it's available at main one big one. But no, the perception again of what that product does within that range is that it makes the £10 one look really good value for money, and the £30 one quite a reasonable upgrade, given the next jump is £60. And until you start looking at the dynamics within these things and what that data is telling us, and therefore how do we apply it to our decisions, that is where customer centricity comes in, because you have to really know that even if your customer might only ever treat themselves to the £90 bottle once a year because they want it with the Christmas meal, let's say, they will come in every week and spend £10 on this and that. Hopefully they're not getting through £10 worth of oil a week. That's quite extreme, but you know what I mean? It influences the customer to remain loyal, because for when they feel a bit more flush or a bit like a treat, that same brand can fulfill their needs. But they probably wouldn't have a £200 oil or a £1 oil, because that then gets too wide. And I think that we've sometimes lost in this desire to be omni-channel and all singing, all dancing and big data and AI. We've sometimes lost the basic principles of good retailing and understanding the data that's telling us, are we efficient? Are we effective? And are we actually being an efficient, effective retailer for our profitability or for our customer? Because those two can sometimes be poles apart. So we still want people to act in a method which is not wasteful, which makes profit, and which makes the customer experience as they have come to expect. But we don't want them to make those decisions where they're so financially driven as to lose all the personality and character out of the experience.
So what are the sort of KPIs we should be looking at then? Taking it down into this level, we're talking about the voice of process. there are some KPIs to be looked at. So what sort of KPIs are you thinking about?
I mean, obviously, a lot of this will come down to the type of retailer you are. How frequently does your customer spend with you? If you're Smithson's of Bond Street, you probably only need to sell to one person a year and you'll be all right. But Primark on Oxford Street needs an awful lot more. But then still at the same time, we'd be looking at things like net cash contribution per square foot of retail space taken into all accounts. It'd be a totally costed model. And another piece of work I did with an electricals retailer was all about balancing off the routes to market with the cost to serve. So making sure that you did pick what's in the old days, you'd have called it the economic order quantity or happy equilibrium. But if your customer is spending thousands, you can invest more in the cost to serve because they're likely to then continue to spend with you and recommend and refer you to all of their friends and relatives, whatever. If they're only in and out and you're in a lowest cost provider situation, you can't afford to have a high cost to serve. So the economies of scale and the efficiencies, the KPI is about efficiency, but the actual number that we're driving for will depend whether you're one or the other. So on-shelf availability of a top-end fashion item at the launch of season, it's 100%, and it doesn't matter that it sells out. That's part of the desire to go and get it while it's there. When it's gone, it's gone. But you wouldn't expect anything less than 99 or 100% on-shelf availability of a tin of beans in a supermarket.
Yeah.
So, but they're the kind of metrics I'd be looking at, but the number that we're aiming for as a target, as long as the trajectory is in the right direction and it's driving continuous improvement, that is customer centric, then, you know, it's each to their own, isn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. And then, you know, we can move from focusing on supply chain-ish type things there, but then there is the service aspects as well. There's the time I expect to have a call picked up if I ring a contact center. There's the speed of response. There's the time that money gets into my account if I've made a return. There's all those lovely sort of things as well. And I think you're right. I think people are looking at other things as well. And I think customers are looking at the stuff around the side. They're looking at the waste. They're looking at these sort of sustainability items. So,
and also there's a quality metric.
Yes.
If you get a really perfunctory response to an online complaint, let's say you've gone in a chat box and it's obviously an AI bot that's talking to you, that's irritating no matter how quick, because you just feel like, well, surely I'm worth talking to. If you put a post on their social media and it's clearly a human being who said, I'm so sorry it's taken so long to get back to you, what I wanted to do was investigate this properly, and they give you all the spiel, but that's honest, authentic, and it also recognizes that there was a failure, but it's going to be addressed. Sometimes being listened to and as a customer and them saying, we have made a mistake, enter the voice of the process, we will investigate it, enter continuous improvement. You don't mind waiting that big bit longer to be dealt with in the sort of more personal way, which is back to the personal touch.
Yeah, no, exactly
so
right.
Quality as well as quantitative measures, which again, how on earth do you measure quality? Because it's very personal.
Yes, no, exactly. And then the ultimate one is, you told us about this and we did this, and you know, you did, we listened, we did.
There is a little company I'm actually starting to work with, an entrepreneur who's actually started to look at the concept of developing a platform where people can give feedback on anything they might notice in either an anonymous or otherwise manner, and will earn rewards accordingly. So if you see something right, tell us, we're grateful to hear it. But if you see something you think could be improved, and so on, I think almost incentivizing people to say when things are good. We have got into a bit of a complaining structure, as you touched on earlier with your receipts and complex URLs. And I think that's quite an interesting dynamic as businesses are looking to ask people to give their feedback in return for loyalty points or something of value, so that they get a sensible balance of weight of opinion and sentiment analysis is really interesting. That's doable through social media to a point, but all of those things are now adding qualitative to our history of quantitative. And much as the quantitative stuff is great for making sure that the business is viable and sustainable, the qualitative is what makes the difference when you're customer centric.
But think of how many trading meetings you've probably sat in. You know, we both sat in several different types of trading meetings on a Monday or whatever. And how often you say this store is down or this region's down based upon last week. And actually so much of it is, that's your quantitative. You can see that the region was down. What we don't know is why. And
why?
We don't know.
Why? The most important question.
Nobody knows why, because half the time it could be that there was, you know, given current times, it could have been COVID's ripped through the store. It could have been before we we've been in tier 3, tier 2, tier whatever they were playing with last year.
Or back in the day, it could be that the road's closed and
Closed
your city
outside.
centre's undergoing some regeneration work that makes it difficult to access.
Yeah.
So in context, it's actually doing quite well. And that's why benchmarking is also quite important, because you can't take anything in isolation. It's like, well, compared to other things and the industry trends and so on and so forth, something's on the up, something's on the down. Well, is that just us? Or is that a wider concern? And I think that also adds that quality alongside sentiment and other things that helps us to really understand the background customer requirement that we're then there to fulfill.
Yeah. So we understand we've got our different voices. We're managing to monitor our process, and this process is telling us a load of stuff. So how can we actually drive behaviors on the back of that? How do we then? Do we just? Yes. It's the classical. How do we change?
Communicate.
Thing? Yes. Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's a classical bit of tell people, talk to people, tell them, get them involved. It's the whole the three lines I've got on the slide on the KPI to drive behaviors, which is let people understand their contribution, what they've done really well to help us get there, or not, and then you can work it through. It's not all a performance thing. The bigger picture, like we talked about, is this is what you've helped contribute to because you paid that invoice on time. Or early, they then gave us this extra deal, which meant that we could get that stock on the shelves. So last year, when there was a big rush on toilet rolls, Kimberly-Clark came and were our best supplier because we paid them on time in the times when it was all really good. And just trying to, and it's all about making that stick, and it's the store managers, it's everybody, it's all the way through, and it's whatever the little community is of your team and your team leader, and then we're back to basics. It's just basics of behaviors and human behaviors almost. I watched this Simon Sinek, however we pronounce it thing, and I ended up posting it on LinkedIn today because it was 25 minutes, and it was basically about one of his books, which is about the infinite game or the finite game, about businesses, about if you play a finite game, there's an end. So like a football game, like you know what the start is, you've got your opponent, you know what the finish is. But an infinite game is like business, and you're always trying to get better. And it was quite good. And it says some points you'll be behind your competition, and some points you'll be ahead of your competition. But you'll never be number one. You'll never be the winner. I'll never be that because it's not possible. It's all about a point in time. And it was really good. And he talked about the points. And one of his key points is, it's the why. Why do you exist? What's your reason? But then about your team and your leadership. And he made this great quote about the leaders in a business. And it was about, and he used a hospital as an example. And he says, I talked to a registrar, and he said, who's your main focus? He said, the patients are my main focus. He said, well, actually, it's not. Because you're the registrar of a hospital. You're not treating people, or you've never treated people, or you haven't done it for a long time. It's the doctors that's treating people. So your concern is actually your people. And he went and he said, the purpose of an executive and the senior leadership is to look after and develop and let the people thrive that actually do the day-to-day operations with the end customers. And that's the responsibility of those executives and the board. And I went, wow. It's the first time I'd actually heard it spoken, but it was really good. And I thought, this just fits in so well with today and the whole concept of customer centricity.
The ripple effect.
It is.
So your cogs, but you all get there in the end.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely that. And that was where I started thinking, wow, this is exactly where we're at. And this is about how you make it stick. It's how you let people make a difference. And it just makes everything all come together. And it's never always perfect. But it's being able to have the mechanisms where you can find out where it's not working. Your process, your voice of your process, where's it not working? We're getting too many returns. We're getting this. We had a great example. Again, it's in the optical world, but we were getting a lot of returns a week after, and people were bringing expensive, personally made specs back. And it turned out that actually what the main reason is actually, I paid more for these than I'd actually budgeted for and I'd expected, but I felt I had to take them at the time. But now I'm coming back, I'm getting my money back. So then we worked out, and we then had to change the process around, well, let's talk to people and let's actually ask the awkward question about what is your budget? What are you expecting to spend? Because most of our returns are coming back saying that they'd spent more than they'd expected, but felt guilty about just not accepting them at the time. So they walked out with them and brought them back. And you thought, wow, it's that sort of feedback and managing that sort of thing becomes quite revealing and interesting all the way back up the chain from the store, because then you're hitting the store manager for having too many returns. Then it comes back and it's go, actually, it was our policy for not having this process of asking people, how much are you expecting on spending? And it was really quite, that's quite fascinating. And then, of course, the happy customers mean that your employees and the store associates are always happier, better place to work. They then want to come. You then recruit the better people. And it becomes such a circle, a bit of a virtuous circle, really. Right, here endeth my rant and what was it, almost like a sermon there. But it's something that is quite, yeah, because you do hear so often, we're going to be customer centric, but one cog can stop it all. And you use the term the cogs, and it may be that you quote a shorter time for delivering something, and it gets late, and it's disappointed, or you then go to what our current government. Apologies for the disclaimer here, but there you go. But anyway, our current government have now changed the way that they're operating. They're now going to the under-promising and trying to over-deliver. If we look at the vaccine and things like that, after having the last year throughout all of this crisis as being over-promising about everything going to be world-class and then falling short. So they're trying to be a little bit more customer-centric, but I don't think they'll get there. But that's, there's my sermon on that matter anyway. But it's just something that I feel really, really strongly about. So quickly, in the last minute, Claire, who's doing it really well that you can see? Does it go back to the independents, as we were talking about last time you visited us?
Not if you look at the processes, but the personality wins it for the independents. Who's doing it really well are the people that seem to have the highest level of customer engagement. And I'm going to have to mention the same one we mentioned last time, not because their processes are particularly slick or efficient, but because they are customer centric, and that's Primark. Their social media engagement over the course of the pandemic, when they can't sell online, choose not to sell online, has been phenomenal. Yeah. Their followers, their understanding of the customer, the empowerment of the people that work across all of their teams to really connect with those customers, and the customer experience they deliver suits the customers. Doesn't suit me particularly, but I'm not the ideal. So I think they're an amazing example.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Shade, any thoughts spring to mind?
Who's doing it really well? I'd say right now, a lot of companies are just trying to pivot and just respond to the circumstances. So anybody who's still, getting engaged with their customers, anybody who's still trading at a decent level and keeping the lights on, I think, kudos to you. You're doing well, because the challenges that have been put in front of every business over the past 12 months have been incredible. And this goes back to a phrase which one of our earlier guests used a few weeks ago. I think it might have been Richard, in fact, which is Richard Newsom actually said, this is an incredible time to be a CIO.
Yes.
This isn't a bad time. This is an incredible opportunity. So I'd say, the people who are grasping the nettle, who are grasping these opportunities and still engaging with their customers, kudos to you. You're on a journey. And if I can paraphrase Claire and Steve, what you said, that journey is not a singular instance. It's a completely evolving, iterative, fluid, if you like, process, which requires your attention over a longer period of time.
No, definitely. Well, thanks, Claire. That's been brilliant. Really good discussion. I know we're at the bottom of the hour, so I'm having to accelerate through because people have meetings and calls to go to. Shahid, do you want to quickly whip through the resource sheet?
I'll whiz through the resource sheet. So Claire Bailey, again, Claire, tremendous thanks from myself. Really appreciate your knowledge and insight on today's subject around customer centricity. We're looking forward to your book coming out as well, Claire. So keep
It's
us
been out since
Oh, it's
2012.
been out for ages.
Oh, it's
Honestly,
been out.
trust
So
me, I know it.
okay, check. Where can we find the reference for that, Claire?
Well, if you just look on my website, retailchampion.co.uk.
Retailchampion.co.uk. So thank you, Claire. Okay.
Thank you.
So Claire Bailey's bio is there for everyone. If you'd like to get in touch with Steve and I, we've got our contact details there. On the left-hand side, Claire has shared some case studies with Lucas, who's our researcher who's pulled this together. Thank you, Lucas. And that's around Amazon and customer centricity at Simon Sinek. We've
That's
also
the video that I watched. It's a good one.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, so some more expanding on the topic for around the 3 pillars: the voice of the process, delivery of CX, etc., with some more resource links for you, as well as some thought leadership again from the likes of Deloitte, Forbes, McKinsey, etc., on the subject of customer centricity. Next week's subject is great title, Steve, Trading Places. So dealing with retail locations on Oxford Street. We've got I guess you could call him a commercial property expert who's joining us next week, who's going to be sharing some insights and some experiences over what's been going on in the commercial property world for the past 12 months. Fascinating subject. Again, we hope you'll join us next week and share your comments and insights as well with us next week on the webinar. With that, I'll say thank you very much from myself. Again, thanks, Claire, for joining us. And I'll hand it over to our captain, who will doff his cap and hopefully sign us out.
Coming in for landing. Yeah, thanks everybody for taking part. Thanks, Claire, again. Much appreciated. Thanks, Shahid, as always, my co-pilot, and to the rest of the team, Joanna, Claire, Lucas. Next week, it's really interesting. It's a guy who's actually made his career just out of helping people get locations on Oxford Street and moving people between them. And he's got a particular view on how that's been impacted due to COVID, where it will go, where it will come from. It'll be really interesting. I spent a great hour talking to him just last week. It's fascinating. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, for taking part. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.